Have you ever wondered why your dollar doesn't go as far? Like, why is it that it seems like you make the most money that you ever have now, but it's more difficult to afford the things that you need? It's the interest rate. The interest rate set by the Federal Reserve is like the number one interest rate, right? And then other banks will follow the interest rate that they have. So right now the interest rates are high. They're about 4.25% to 4.5%. That is what they say. I don't know why they don't just pick one, but it's between 4.25% and 4.5%. That's how much it costs for the bank to borrow money from the Fed. And then that's how much the mortgage lender has to borrow from the bank, which borrows from the Fed, right? That's why interest rates on mortgages are so high. So when the Fed sets an interest rate, that's what other banks and other like lenders will follow. Right here, I don't have a subscription to the New York Times because why would I? So I have to get it from here. But this is the title to the New York Times article, right? High interest rates are hitting poor Americans the hardest. This is true. When there are high interest rates, things are always just more expensive because we live in a debt-based system, meaning that everybody like makes their money off of debt. This is from that same article, New York Times. For poorer families, it is different. They are likelier to carry a balance on their credit cards. When you carry a balance on your credit card, that balance, so like let's say in 1 month you borrow $100, your interest rate's going to kick in every month. So you can spend the $100 in like week 1 of month 1. Then on month 2, you can not add any to the balance, but then have to pay more than $100 because your interest rate will now kick in and it will add on to your interest rate. And then let's say you don't pay it off on month 2, and then month 3, you have a increased balance on your credit card, and your interest rate will affect the increased balance. Right? So like if you don't pay off your credit card for 2 months, your interest rate, let's say, will add on $10. Well, next month it'll add on $15 because of the added $10. These are all made up numbers. So poor people, and I wouldn't even say poor, like I'm not poor, and yet this is a problem that happens to me, right? Just normal people. When you make less than, I would say, $250,000 a year, like that's most of us. So when you're borrowing money, the interest rate just keeps compounding. It keeps adding to the added interest rate of the previous month. This is what happens. So that's just interest rates affecting normal people. Now you got to think about businesses. Businesses end up borrowing money to get their products or whatever they're selling. The price of everything is now going up, like just on interest rates alone, and that's every business, right? So if you own a hardware store and you buy a hammer for $5, now interest rates are up. You're using debt in order to buy that hammer so that you could sell it to the next person. Now you're like kind of adding the interest rate to the price of the product that you're selling, and you're just gonna pass it on to the consumer, right? It's always just trickling down. So Home Depot buys that using debt, the interest rate is high, they're just gonna add the price on, and now you're gonna have to pay for the increased price. Now the reason the interest rate is so high is because the neutral interest rate is too low. So the people who regulate how the money flows, these are the people from the Federal Open Market Committee. The Federal Open Market Committee manages the Federal Reserve. And anything that has to deal with money on a big level is always going to come back to how the Federal Reserve regulates the money. So right here, the Monetary Policy Strategies for a Low Neutral Interest Rate World was a speech by the CEO of the Federal Reserve, the John C. Williams. It happened in 2018, this speech. And the speech talks about how there is a low neutral interest rate. When a low neutral interest rate happens, that means you cannot use the actual interest rate to come down far enough to create stimulation. So the neutral interest rate is the hypothetical interest rate in which neither causes stimulation nor restriction, right? So a actual interest rate above the neutral interest rate is going to cause restriction. That's where we are, right? We have restriction in the economy. A lower interest rate, like an interest rate below the neutral interest rate, that is going to cause stimulation. Remember, the interest rate is the price of money. When you borrow money, there's a price tacked onto that. When there's a low interest rate, that means money is cheap. When there's a high interest rate, that means money is expensive. And because everybody borrows money, that means the price of everything goes up. If money is expensive, everything's expensive. So here, that same speech, we're explaining how there's a very low neutral interest rate up top. Today, we face an altogether different set of problems stemming from a very low neutral interest rate. The short-term real interest rate consistent with the economy operating at its potential alongside low stable inflation. Ironically, the problem we need to solve these days is the risk of inflation that is persistently too low rather than too high. We'll skip the second part for now. That's not what this video is about. But the neutral interest rate being low means that we cannot use the real interest rate. Remember, if the real interest rate goes below the neutral interest rate, that's going to cause stimulation. That's going to feel like a good time. You will feel like things are easier when the interest rate is low. Right now, the neutral interest rate is too low. That means we cannot go below the neutral interest rate to cause stimulation. It does not work. And that is why things feel difficult for you and me. Like, it's because of the regulation on the monetary policy. Now, the problem is that they cannot, it's not that they choose not to. It's that they cannot create stimulation. They cannot make it easy for you because the neutral interest rate, which they do not have control of, the neutral interest rate is way down here. If it's way down here, you cannot go low. When you go low, you cause stimulation. The neutral interest rate is too low. And that is why the new plan, in order to regulate monetary policy, they like the real interest rate, what you and I pay, and then the neutral interest rate, the hypothetical one. Right now, we're in a situation where it's like this. And so we need what their plan is. Because they cannot do this, because it's hitting the lower bound of zero, they cannot go under. Right now, the plan that the Federal Reserve has, because they do want interest rates to go down. They do want to create a stimulative effect. That is their goal. But they cannot. It's not because they hate you. And I wouldn't even say that they're good people. Like, they're not. But they just are. Like a cheetah eating an antelope is not evil. It just is. So this is just what is. It's I don't care what they do. It's just you need to pay attention. That's all. So when the neutral interest rate's low, right, and you cannot move this side anymore, the actual interest rate, their plan now is to move the neutral interest rate. That comes with a lot of complications. It's very difficult to move this. But what do they do to try to move it, and it's working, is they cause an increased inflation expectation. So I didn't take a screenshot of the actual quote, but this is the speech where it happens. So when they create an increased inflation expectation, meaning that when they create the zeitgeist, the overall mentality of the people, when they create a situation in which like people believe that prices will be higher in the future, that's going to raise the neutral interest rate, right? The plan is to do this. It is no longer to get the interest rate right here, interest rate. It is no longer to do this because it doesn't work. So now they have to do this, neutral interest rate. They need to raise it. That is why the tariffs are happening. It has nothing to do with the actual tariffs. It is about getting people to believe that there will be an increase of prices in the future.